I was 17 years old when I started working as a pizza delivery driver. And at that age, freedom feels bigger than it really is. You don't notice the risks yet. All you see is a car, some gas money, and the ability to stay out late without anyone questioning you. The pizza place was a small, locally owned shop tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down video rental store. Nothing fancy. The kind of place where the grease stains on the floor never fully came out no matter how much you mopped. I worked there after school and on weekends, mostly nights because that's when the tips were better. By the time this happened, I'd been delivering pizzas for several months. I knew the routine by heart. Grab the order slip, check the address, box the pizza, put it in the thermal bag, and head out. Most deliveries were boring. Normal houses, normal people, sometimes drunk college kids, sometimes tired parents. Nothing ever felt dangerous. That night, it was either a Friday or Saturday. I can't remember which, but I do remember it was late. Past 11. I was working the closing shift, which meant I'd be one of the last people out. The shop stayed open until midnight on weekends, and those last few deliveries were always the strangest. People ordering late tended to be drunk, lonely, or both. My manager handed me an order slip and said, "One pie." 15 minutes out. That alone was unusual. Our delivery radius wasn't huge, and most orders were 5 minutes away, maybe 10 at most. 15 min outskirts of town. The name on the ticket was Karen. I joked to myself that at least the tip might be decent if they were that far away. I loaded the pizza into my car, an old Toyota Corolla that had more rust than paint, and started driving. I had my usual playlist on, windows cracked, feeling relaxed. I wasn't thinking about danger. I was thinking about getting back quickly so I could clock out. The neighborhood I pulled into was older and rundown. Smaller houses, dim streetlights, lawns that hadn't been cared for in years. Still, nothing screamed, "Leave immediately." I parked in front of the house listed on the receipt. One story, small, lights on in a room downstairs. It looked lived in. As I stepped out of my car and grabbed the pizza bag, I heard a woman's voice call out from somewhere to my left. "Excuse me." I turned and saw a woman leaning out of the window of a neighboring house. "That pizza is actually for us," she said. "We gave the wrong address." That should have been my first red flag. People don't usually shout corrections from windows at almost midnight. But again, I was 17. I didn't think like that. I walked over to the next house. It looked similar, small, worn, porch light flickering. I rang the doorbell. Nothing happened. The woman shouted again that the bell was broken, so I knocked. Hard. I waited. 30 seconds. Nothing. I knocked again. From inside, I heard a woman yell, "1 second." That 1 second stretched into another full minute. When the door finally opened, a woman in her mid-40s stood there smiling at me. Not a normal smile, the kind that lingers too long. She looked me up and down without trying to hide it, then called loudly into the house, "Charles, come here. You need to see how handsome our delivery boy is." Another woman appeared beside her, around the same age. They both laughed, openly staring at me. I felt my face get hot. I wasn't used to attention like that, especially not from women old enough to be my mom. They asked my name, asked how old I was, asked how late I worked. When one of them asked what time I got off, my stomach tightened. Something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable, but I ignored the feeling. Then one of them asked if I wanted to come inside and have some wine with them. Every instinct told me no, but I said yes. I lied about my age, told them I was 21. They didn't care either way. They took the pizza and told me to sit on the couch. One sat on each side of me. The room smelled like alcohol. Their movements were slow and loose. They were already drunk. They complimented my smile, my dimples, how shy I was. I laughed awkwardly, sipping wine that tasted terrible, but pretending it didn't. My heart was racing, but not in a good way. That's when one of them said, "We want to show you something." She nodded toward the basement door. They told me to go first. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, staring into complete darkness. No light on, no visible switch. I asked where the lights were. "Leave them off," one of them said. I looked back at them. Their smiles were gone. Their faces were blank, emotionless, like masks that had slipped for just a second. When they noticed me staring, they smiled again. I asked what was down there. They both said at the same time, "A surprise." I took one step down. And that's when I saw something move. Not clearly, just enough. Something shifting in the darkness. A shape that didn't belong. I turned around and saw the two women creeping toward the basement door behind me. Slowly, quietly, I backed up, slammed the basement door shut, and stepped around them toward the front door. That's when I saw him. A massive man stood in the doorway to the kitchen. He hadn't made a sound. He was tall, wide, and completely calm. He looked at me and said, "Let's just make this easy." I dropped the pizza and ran. I barely made it to my car before he was outside, pounding on the passenger window, trying the handle. I drove away shaking, not looking back. I still don't know what was waiting in that basement. I don't want to. When I was 19 years old, delivering pizza was just a way to get by. I wasn't chasing a career. I wasn't thinking about the future. I just needed money for gas, food, and the occasional night out with friends. The job itself was mindless, which I liked. Take an order, box the food, drive to the address, collect the cash, repeat. I had done hundreds of deliveries by the time this happened. Enough that nothing surprised me anymore. Or so I thought. Weird customers, drunk people, angry people, people answering the door in towels. It all blurred together. Up until that night, nothing had ever truly scared me. The order itself was forgettable. A chicken parm hero and a single slice of plain pizza. Small orders like that usually meant small tips, but drivers didn't get to choose. You took what came up. I remember glancing at the address and groaning quietly. It was on a dead-end road on the outskirts of town. That street always felt strange to me. Not dangerous exactly, just isolated. Houses were spread farther apart, with larger properties and long driveways. It felt more rural than suburban. It was around 6 in the evening when I pulled onto the street, but it was late fall and darkness had already started creeping in. Porch lights were coming on in other neighborhoods. This street, however, looked unusually dark. As I drove slowly down the road, one house immediately stood out. An RV sat parked on the grass beside it, partially sinking into the ground. Next to that was a small patch of woods that looked unmaintained, branches hanging low and tangled together. The house I was delivering to sat near the end of the block. It was small, oddly shaped, and surrounded by a massive yard that clearly hadn't been taken care of in a long time. The grass was overgrown. Bushes spilled out toward the driveway. Right next door was another house that looked completely abandoned. Windows dark, paint peeling, shrubs growing wild. I pulled into the driveway and noticed something unsettling right away. Every light in the house was off. That alone wouldn't have been strange, except it was already dark outside. Most people had at least one light on by then. What bothered me more was that the front door was cracked open, just slightly. I grabbed the food and stepped out of my car. As I walked toward the house, I heard something that made me stop. Piano music. It wasn't loud. It sounded distant, muffled, like it was coming from somewhere deeper inside the house. The tune itself was simple, slow, repetitive, and oddly off-key. It sounded like someone playing the same few notes over and over again without any real rhythm. I stood there listening for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I knocked on the door. No answer. The piano kept playing. I rang the doorbell. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, realizing quickly that it didn't work. The music didn't stop. At that point, I felt uncomfortable just standing there. The door being open bothered me, but I wasn't about to walk inside someone's house uninvited. So I decided to check around back, thinking maybe they were outside or hadn't heard me. I walked along the side of the house, crunching through dead leaves. The backyard was an absolute mess. Random objects littered the grass. Old furniture, broken containers, scraps of metal. In the middle of the yard sat a rusted section of chain-link fence that looked like it had been ripped out and dropped there. I knocked loudly on the back door. Nothing. I peered through the glass and saw what looked like a cluttered storm room or storage area, piled with junk. Whoever lived here didn't seem to care about cleanliness at all. The piano was still playing. I went back around to the front of the house, my discomfort growing. I pulled out my phone and called the pizzeria. One of the guys working answered, and I asked him to double-check the address. He confirmed it. No mistake. So now I felt stuck. I didn't want to just leave without trying one more time, but everything about this place felt wrong. I walked back up to the front door and pushed it open slightly more, just enough to stand in the doorway. "Pizza delivery," I called out. The piano stopped. The sudden silence felt heavy. A few seconds passed, and then a voice from somewhere inside the house called out, "Over here." Before I could respond, the piano started playing again. Same notes. Same eerie repetition. I stepped just inside the house, staying close to the door. The air inside smelled musty, like damp wood and old clothes. I could barely see anything. No lights were on anywhere, and the only illumination came from the fading daylight behind me. "Hello," I said. The piano stopped again. This time, the silence lasted longer. I began backing toward the door, but then a voice spoke again, sounding strained and distant. "I'm sorry. I have trouble walking. Could you bring it in here?" I asked what room he was in. There was a pause. If you walked through the living room, the voice said, "I'm in the dining room." Something about the delay in his response bothered me. The piano starting and stopping bothered me even more. None of this was mentioned when the order was placed. I stood there debating what to do. Part of me felt guilty. What if this was just an old man who genuinely needed help? I didn't want to be rude or heartless. But another part of me, the louder part, felt like I was being lured deeper into the house. I took a few slow steps forward. The living room was cluttered, but mostly empty. Furniture pushed against walls. The smell was stronger here. The piano music did not resume. I reached the edge of an opening that led into what I assumed was the dining room. Instead of walking straight in, I leaned slightly around the corner, just enough for one eye to see. The piano sat against the far wall. No one was sitting at it. No one was in the room at all. The realization hit me all at once. The music hadn't been coming from a person. It couldn't have been. My chest tightened, and I stepped backward quietly. The floor creaked beneath my feet, and I froze, expecting someone to rush toward me. Nothing happened. I turned and walked, then nearly ran, back to the front door, pulled it shut behind me, and hurried to my car. I didn't drive off immediately. I sat there for a moment, hands shaking, watching the house. No movement, no lights, no music. I went back to the pizzeria and told my boss everything. He listened without interrupting and didn't question my decision to leave. What made it even stranger was that the customer never called back asking where their food was. Later that night, after my shift ended, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the address online. The house had been foreclosed on months earlier. It had been listed as vacant. No one was supposed to be living there. To this day, I still don't know who or what was playing that piano. It was my last week working at the Italian restaurant, and I remember feeling relieved about it. The place was half pizzeria, half sit-down Italian dining, and I had worked every position there at one point or another. Some nights I'd be up front taking orders, other nights bussing tables, and when they were short on drivers, I'd take deliveries. Deliveries were my favorite. You worked alone, you made tips, and for the most part, no one bothered you. That's why it felt almost poetic in the worst possible way. Then my final shift ended with the most terrifying delivery of my life. The order came in late, as these things usually do. It was close to closing time, maybe 40 minutes before we locked the doors. The kitchen was already half cleaned, chairs flipped onto tables in the dining area, the place smelling more like bleach than food. The ticket printed, and I remember one of the cooks whistling when he read it. 3 specialty pizzas. The total was just under $70. Big orders usually meant good tips, but there was a catch. The address was in a part of town everyone avoided if they could help it. The kind of neighborhood where streetlights didn't work and houses looked more abandoned than lived in. I didn't argue. I grabbed the pizzas, loaded them into my old Honda Civic, and took off. The drive took about 15 minutes. The farther I went, the worse the area looked. Stores disappeared. Houses became rundown. Yards were littered with trash. I told myself that plenty of people lived in bad neighborhoods and were perfectly normal. Still, my nerves were on edge. When I finally reached the address, I noticed right away how quiet the street was. No music, no people outside, no cars passing by, just silence. I parked and walked up to the house. Before I could even ring the bell, the door opened. A man stood there holding a handgun. I froze. I don't know much about guns, but I didn't need to. The sight of it alone was enough to make my stomach drop and my heart slam against my ribs. He held it casually, but directly in my direction. Before I could react, two more men rushed up behind him and grabbed me, pulling me inside the doorway. The first man yelled something in Spanish. The others shouted back. My mind went blank. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking at all. Then the man with the gun looked at me and said, in broken English, "Give me everything." My hand was shaking so badly I could barely move. I fumbled for my wallet and handed it to him. He flipped it open, dumped everything onto the floor, and barked, "Phone." I handed him my phone, a Motorola Razr. At the time, it was one of the nicest phones you could have. One of the other men grabbed my wrist and yanked off my watch. Another reached into my wallet and pulled out my ID. That's when things got worse. He read my address out loud. The man with the gun leaned in close and told me that if I went to the police, they'd come to my house and kill my entire family. I believed him. They shoved me back outside and pushed me down the steps. I hit the concrete hard, skinning my knees and hands. The door slammed shut behind me. I sat there for a moment, bleeding, shaking, and completely numb. I didn't go back to the restaurant. I drove home. My parents immediately knew something was wrong. I was pale, quiet. My clothes were torn, my knees bleeding through my shorts. When they finally got me to talk, I told them everything. My dad didn't hesitate. He had connections with the local police department. He called one of his friends immediately. They ran the address. The man who lived there had multiple felony convictions. That night, police surrounded the house. Two of the three men were arrested. The man with the gun had already been convicted multiple times and received a life sentence. Another got 5 years. The third man was never found. Years have passed since then, but sometimes late at night, I still wake up to sounds outside my house. Footsteps, a gate creaking, something moving just beyond my window. I don't know if it's paranoia, or if that third man is still out there.